Hey everyone, it's Spencer here, and welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. Today I have Craig Hewitt on the show. He is the owner and founder of Castos.com. Castos is a podcast hosting platform. They also offer podcast editing services and other services to make sure that you've got the greatest podcast out there and that you are hosting it and getting it distributed as easily as possible. I'm really excited to have Craig on the show. We've known each other for about 4 years. We actually originally connected through a small conference. It was a conference for online marketers and online entrepreneurs. And we talk a little bit about that, how we met. But Craig is somebody that has been able to build his business to now 7 or 8 employees, and it's growing. The podcasting trend is moving in the right direction for sure. More and more people are getting involved in podcasting, and Castos is well positioned to help people get their podcast started. If you actually want to go check out Castos, you can go to castos.com/niche pursuits. Craig has been willing to offer a special discount, which is 50% off your first 3 months. And they do also offer a free trial. And so if you go over to castos.com/niche pursuits, you can check that out. Now, partway through the podcast, Craig also mentions Ahrefs and how they are using the free content marketing course. He used that to train his marketing manager and said, hey, follow this course and go do content marketing. And she was able to pick that up really quickly. And now content marketing is a huge part of their business. This episode is actually sponsored by Ahrefs. And so if you want to see their free content marketing course, you can go check that out. You can do a quick search for the free content marketing course by Ahrefs, and it's a free video course that walks you through how to do a backlink analysis, content analysis, and figure out how to do some basic content marketing. Ahrefs also has a new free webmaster tools where you can, again, plug in your own website to get backlink analysis for free, and also do a full site audit for free and really start to improve the SEO value of your site. So I recommend that you check out ahrefs.com. It's a great tool that I use in my own business. And now with their free webmaster tools, it is a no-brainer to at least get started. So with that, we're going to get started into the story of Craig Hewitt and Castos.com. Hey, Craig, welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast.
Hey, Spencer. Thanks for having me, man.
Yep. It's good to have you. Let's give people a little bit of background about how we connected here. It's been maybe 4 years ago that we at least met each other in person at Rhodium Weekend, I think it was, right?
Yeah. I think we met at Rhodium in Vegas. Golly, it makes me feel so old to say 4 years ago that I've been doing this, but yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
It was probably about 4 years ago. And for people that don't know about Rhodium, I think I've maybe mentioned it once or twice. It's a really cool collection of people, right? That Chris Yates is the founder there, and he just gets smart internet entrepreneurs together that are talking about growing online businesses, buying and selling businesses. And that's where we met. It's an event that's like 100 to 200 people. So it's a great place to meet people.
Yeah. I mean, just as an aside, I really like these small conferences. I think it allows you to really connect with people so much more in such a different way than 2, 5, 20,000 people at this huge convention center, and you're just walking all over everywhere and don't get a chance to really chat with people. But at those small ones, you can, go to dinner with almost everyone over a couple of days.
Yep.
Yeah, they're really great. I miss events like that.
Yep. I agree. Yeah. Between lunch, dinner, and then whatever activities are going on, you do. Yeah. You pretty much meet everybody, which is awesome. And so I will just say that, out of that teeny event, I've definitely connected more closely with way more people than the large conferences that I've gone to that are 5,000 people or something like that. So very cool. I'll just say I'm digging the beard. Looking good, man.
Likewise, yeah.
So I brought it back a couple of weeks ago. So I think my wife's happy. She seems okay with it. So
That's cool. That's
we're
cool.
we're
Yeah, I've
keeping.
been after COVID started, I started growing my hair out, and it's like mostly gray. When some my wife thinks I look distinguished, I'm like, I'll go with distinguished. Yeah,
There you go. I like it. Yep. Looking smarter, I guess, or something.
something.
So let's chat business here. Right now you're involved in Castos.com. That's your main business. But let's go back before Castos. What were you doing? How'd you get started with online business in general?
Yeah. So I think the place and the way that you and I first got introduced, one was from me listening to the podcast, right? So like, I think there's all these stories going on over the internet of like, because of my podcast, I blank. I got to meet this person. I got this deal. I was able to partner with this other company. And I think anybody that doesn't appreciate like the power of podcasting as a networking opportunity and a kind of world builder in online business especially is kind of missing the boat. So like if you don't have a podcast, start a podcast, or at least get on a bunch of podcasts, because it absolutely is a great way to meet people and build your network. But yeah, so I knew of you through the podcast, and so it's really cool to be on the show here like 5 or 6 years later, whatever it is. But yeah, I think that we kind of first really met each other like one-on-one, I guess, through my first online business, which is called Podcast Motor. So
Yep.
Podcast Motor kind of is and was a productized service that does podcast editing and production. So the goal with Podcast Motor is you record an episode like this, send it over to our team. We have a team of audio engineers, we have a team of writers, we have in-house transcriptionists, and they produce the whole episode, marketing materials and everything, and even publish it to your website on kind of a monthly retainer or per episode basis. And so I think that's how we first started chatting, like, individually, and then we met at Rhodium. And that was my first online business, and ran that as kind of my main thing while I had a side job. So it was like my main side hustle, I guess, for too long, 2.5 years maybe.
Uh-huh.
And it's just, I mean, it's so hard. About a year after that, got the opportunity to purchase a WordPress plugin called Seriously Simple Podcasting. And so Seriously Simple Podcasting is top ranked WordPress plugin that lets you kind of add podcasting functionality to a WordPress site. And on top of that, we've built the Castos hosting platform. So, folks that are familiar with podcasts, you have to have your podcast files, especially hosted in a dedicated platform. People have heard of things like SoundCloud or Libsyn. Castos is a hosting platform that is kind of similar to those, but our biggest differentiator historically has been this integration with WordPress to where you can manage all of your podcast contents from your WordPress site, but your files are hosted on our dedicated platform. So folks that have big sites like Niche Pursuits that want to integrate a podcast into that and not have to go manage their podcast somewhere else and then copy some crazy iframe code, maybe like you do every week,
Yep.
back into your WordPress site, but have a real native kind of experience. That's what Seriously Simple Podcasting allows you to have.
Yeah.
So that's a very short version of like the last 5 years, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love the hustle, the ability to kind of create a business and make it work for you. And so you've been full time for the last, it sounds like you had a couple of side hustles, right? But you've kind of been on your own as an entrepreneur for, is it 5 years now then?
Yeah, almost 5 years. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Very good. So let's take the next step. So you got Seriously Simple Podcasts, the plugin, right? And you kind of parlayed that into, it sounds like that kind of led to then Castos. Maybe talk about the genesis of Castos, why you went all in with podcast hosting and what it is.
Yeah. So it was really the idea from the beginning was to say like, and I think in retrospect, it sounds really smart. But maybe there are people that do this. I think that there are probably people that do this in like the content site world is like buy a similar or adjacent site and kind of redirect it into your main site, or have it be the origin of building an e-commerce store on top of like an existing blog. But that's basically what we did is we bought this WordPress plugin that was completely free. There was no monetization to it. There was no revenue. but it was the base of users and exposure and traffic that we built the hosting platform on top of. And so it was always the idea of like, hey, if we buy basically a marketing channel, we can build the software to meet this need that we think these people have. And that was kind of validated in another service that does a similar thing. So there's another WordPress plugin that also has a hosting platform connected to it. So that was cool that we saw, hey, this, these other guys are doing it. We think we can do it a little different and better. And so like it was a little bit validated, but I think from a strategic perspective, if folks are looking at like, hey, I want to get into this thing, but I don't want to start from scratch, think about like, hey, could you buy a WordPress plugin to integrate into your SaaS app? Could you buy a blog in the e-commerce niche that you're looking to get into as a source of traffic? If I had to do all this over again, I would try to do something similar like that.
Yeah, quick interjection here. So how much did you pay for the plugin? Do you mind sharing that?
In the thousands. Yeah. So like in the four figures. Yeah.
Okay. So not an insane amount.
Yep. But really, like, I think if anybody has looked at things on like, places like Flippa, the term potential is like the scary word that you want to run away from. But that's all it was really. It was a bunch of users and there was potential to build a business on. I think maybe it kind of kickstarted the business as opposed to starting the whole marketing effort from scratch. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I 100% agree. I'm just thinking about some of my businesses and in terms of leveraging other assets, right? Like I didn't buy nichepursuits.com, but because I have a blog and a lot of traffic coming to nichepursuits.com, I've been able to launch other software products really based on that audience, right? Longtail Pro back in the day, and now I'm running Link Whisper that really, if I didn't have a blog and an audience, it would be a lot more difficult to gain traction. And so that's, of course, kind of what you did, but I agree that if people can go out there and buy an asset, whether it's a plugin or a blog or something that helps them gain some traction, they can bolt on additional businesses or products or whatever that maybe match that audience. So I think it's smart, really smart strategy.
Yep. Yeah. But yes, I mean, kind of from the beginning, buying the plugin was the avenue that we would build a hosting platform on top of. And originally it only worked with WordPress. After about 4 or 5 months, we opened it up to where now you can use Castos hosting by itself, just like as a standalone tool if you're not using a WordPress site. And if you're using WordPress, it's a really great experience. Most of our customers, like 3/4 of our customers, probably use WordPress just because that's kind of our main marketing channel, I think. And is kind of the biggest differentiator for us versus the 800 other competitors, especially some that have crept up since we started. But I think that you asked the reason I got into podcast hosting. It is kind of the same reason that maybe like you started Link Whisper is you're already in this space. The industry, the problems, the things that people care about. And so for you, launching that is much less riskier and has a much better chance of success than you going and starting a DevOps tool, right? Or whatever, Shopify app or something that like, you don't know the people, you don't know the partners that you might be able to partner with, the marketing channels, the issues that your potential customers are having, and the way to talk to them and stuff like that. So I think that kind of along this line that we're going is like, if you have a presence in a space or you want to acquire a way for a presence in a space, know a lot about that before you really try to build a business, because it just makes everything easier to be able to be your customer and dog food your own stuff. I think is really helpful.
Yeah, 100%. Being able to be familiar with, like you said, the marketing channels, the influencers that you might connect with, and just being able to understand the messaging and truly understand the audience, like that goes a long way, right? If I were to suddenly create some, medical device that I wanted to sell to doctors, like I don't have any connections there, right? Like that would not go well. But like you said, because you were kind of in the podcasting space, you've had Podcast Motor for a long time, you understand the industry. And so it just makes a lot of sense to go into podcast hosting.
Yeah.
So you started Castos in what year?
2017.
Okay. So it's been about 3 years. and how's it going?
Good. I mean, I think by all objective measures, it's going well. We're growing. We're a team of 7 full-time people, about to be 8. We're a fully remote team, which is a blessing, especially these days.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, we're growing even now, like 10% per month. So I think after 3 years, that, as you know, like that gets hard to keep that kind of growth up. So yeah, we're very happy to be. I think, I have to say we're probably fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. There's a little bit of luck and a little bit of intentionality to that, but there's definitely some luck to be in a place like podcasting that's really popular and growing. We're trying to make the best of being lucky, though.
Yeah, you kind of make your own luck, I guess, right? Is being in the right place at the right time, but hustling and having the right products, before the trends hit is certainly helpful as well. So first, congrats on having a successful business there. Having you said about 8. You're going to have 8 full-time employees.
We'll be 8 in a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many of those are developers?
It will be 3 developers.
Yep. Okay. Yep. That's what I find is really interesting with software is the draw is that you can build something once and sell an infinite number of copies of that, right? Said piece of software, but there's never ending either bug fixes or tweaks or customizations or just new features, right? Like it's a never ending development cycle.
Yeah. I feel like just now, after 3 years, we're getting to the point, I mentioned it to our lead developer of the day, just now to the point where like, I'm not frantic every day about the product of like, this is broken. This isn't like I want it to, this doesn't work. The customer's pissed about this just after 3 years. I mean, I think, yeah, folks that are getting into software, just starting or thinking about it, like it is not easy. It is not a quick win. And you hear these stories of, probably like yourself, where you hear Nathan Barry about ConvertKit, that he didn't take a salary for 2 years, and he already had a huge audience and it's, this mega successful business now, but 2 years of making no money for yourself. And I mean, I was fortunate to be able to pay myself from Podcast Motor, so I didn't have to take money out of Castos for a while too. Because I think that like this fallacy of like, oh, I'm going to start a SaaS business and I'm a developer and I can just do this and I'll be making 20 grand a month in a year is baloney, and nobody does it. And 3 years later, I do see like the other side of that, probably where you got to with Longtail Pro, that like once you have the team and you can grow kind of organically without having kind of outside leverage or sacrificing your own salary, it really is a nice business, but it is a long road to go, especially at like our plans start at $20 a month. And so I think that's like, that just makes it hard, like these apps that are $100 or $300 a month. It's just easier to grow with those kind of increments, but.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I agree. From the outside, I'll just echo that. Software is a great business, and I still would encourage people to look at software as a business, right? But you do have to be in it for the long term. You have to be thinking about when you actually can pay yourself. I've been building Link Whisper now, believe it or not, for a year, and well, if I think about when I actually started developing, it's been well over 2 years, right? It took almost a year before we just launched it, before I made any money to sort of pay off some of that initial development costs. But it can easily be 2-3 years before you start to be able to take a little bit of cash out of the business and pay yourself. But then it can get very, very good at that point. So I want to talk a little bit, or ask your thoughts and insights on sort of the trends of podcasting. You talked a little bit about that and sort of mentioned, hey, we're riding a nice trend here. Can you talk to some of those either stats or just generally what you're seeing in the podcasting space? So I'm actually a user of Ahrefs. I use it on my site to do site audits, to do backlink analysis, and to figure out top keywords that I'm ranking for and find new opportunities. What's really cool is that Ahrefs has actually recently released their free tool called Webmaster Tools. It's free for your own sites. You can go ahead and add that, and it will immediately start doing a site audit. You can schedule that to run on a regular basis. And what that will do is it'll show you all the broken links that you have on your site, any 404 pages, as well as a ton of other SEO factors that you could be optimizing. And so for free, you can start immediately improving your site. Now, Ahrefs is a huge suite of tools from keyword research to link building analysis and much more. And you get a lot of that with the free Webmaster Tools. And so if you are not an Ahrefs user, you can at least dip your toes in the water by trying it out for free. You can go over to ahrefs.com and, of course, find their free Webmaster Tools there. Or you can go check out the content marketing course that Craig has mentioned, and you can take that course yourself and perhaps pick up a few strategies of how you can be doing content marketing a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that anybody that listens to podcasts knows that it's super popular, right? Everybody and their brother is starting a podcast or has one already. And I think that's a really good sign, right? Even if you haven't started your podcast, like today is the best day, tomorrow is the next best day. And so like if you haven't started yet, I would seriously consider it, because if you're in, like, from a content marketing perspective, it's a great form of content. If you're in like more of a B2B or like sales role, it's a fantastic marketing or like networking opportunity, right? The chance to have 45-minute conversations like we're having today with people that you might not be able to get on the phone otherwise is like the hidden gem, and like a side benefit for a lot of people of podcasting, that you might have a direct goal of like, hey, I'm going to do podcasting for content marketing for my business, but for me as the owner or the head of marketing or whatever, I'm going to get to talk to all of these other people in my niche that I couldn't get on the phone otherwise. So I think that that's like one of the hidden benefits, especially like in the B2B or in your kind of realm. That's one of the things that is definitely like a side benefit. We're seeing some really interesting stuff, particularly on our platform, but there's some other people doing similar kinds of things in different ways around private podcasting. So Niche Pursuits is a public podcast. You go to Apple or Overcast or Google and subscribe to the podcast. Spencer, you as the host want everyone to listen, but there are a lot of people and use cases for restricting access to podcasts. So think about, like, the biggest one is like companies, right? We're working with some enormous like Fortune 100 companies on creating private podcasts for their internal teams. So things like HR or field sales, especially now that everyone is remote, leadership wanting to give updates about a thing to their employees. And so they need a way to make sure that not every person out there has access to this content. And so how can you lock down that content in a secure way, but that is also kind of convenient for people to listen to? And so we've come up with some pretty cool ways to do that. We call it private podcasting. And recently we've launched more, kind of getting away from the true B2B side of things, but more, I'll say, in our world of like people that use tools like Zapier to connect, an app. Like, say you have a course on Teachable and you want all of your new students on Teachable to get invited to your private podcast too. So you have your course on Teachable, but you also have repurposed or created some additional content that you want to deliver in podcast form. Hook those two tools together, Teachable through Zapier to Castos, to automatically enroll all of your Teachable students in your private podcast. So only they have access to this kind of unique content. So we're having a lot of really cool conversations with folks these days about like, hey, I have this enormous membership site and I want to invite all of my students there to this private podcast. Or I'm like a mental health professional. I want to have a private podcast for every one of my patients. How do I do that? And then the more kind of common use case of like, hey, we are a company like 3M. We want to send a weekly sales podcast to all of our salespeople out in the field, and we want to do it in a secure way. So, I mean, it's just a different. It's still podcasting for sure, right? Still
Yep.
audio over an RSS feed, but it's in a very different application, and I think it's something that's evolving a lot. And people that listen to this podcast are probably thinking of really different ways than I do about how to use this, and I think that's why it's so cool, because the options are not endless, but there's a lot of them, you know?
Yep. So you're seeing more and more people interested in that option. Are they coming to you asking for that, or is that something you're having to tell people, hey, we do private podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, we're on the stump quite a bit about this. Like, we're talking about it a lot.
Yeah.
And so maybe as a result, we're definitely getting a lot of people coming to us and saying, like, hey, we're this big organization. We want to, buy 2,000 licenses of this, or, hey, I just started this course on Lifter LMS. I want to hook Lifter LMS up through Zapier to my Castos account, or anything in between there.
Yeah. So let me ask how maybe I would do this, right? So let's say I don't have a membership area, right? That makes a lot of sense, actually, what you're explaining. If somebody's selling a training course or something with Teachable or whatever, if they could link that up and people also get access to this private podcast, that's pretty cool. But let's say I don't have that all set up, and I want to do a private podcast, and I want to charge for that. I want to charge people $5 a month to get to, private episodes of Niche Pursuits, whatever Spencer's thoughts, for the month, whatever they are. How would I do that? Do I come, is there a plan for me on Castos where I can set it all up and collect payments through Castos?
Yeah, so it's definitely coming. We're calling it premium podcasting. So private podcasting is kind of restricted, but not monetized. Premium podcasting is, you can charge money directly through Castos, and you don't need any kind of external dependencies. And yeah, I mean, I'd like to share kind of our thought process of why we've taken kind of a stepwise approach to this, because I think going just from public podcasting to premium podcasting, so private with built-in paid options, leaves out this whole middle ground, and so we wanted to take the approach of saying, like, we want people that have a membership site or have a Shopify store or whatever to be able to offer this add-on kind of value to their customers. Because I think one thing that, like, in the podcasting space, there are these new players that are only offering this, premium paid podcasting thing. And watching them really closely, you see that they're, I'll say, pivoting a lot in how they're pricing and who they're talking to and things like that. And so, to be perfectly honest, I think there is a place for just paid podcast content, but I think the market, a very fancy marketing term, the total addressable market of this kind of middle ground where we are now, of like e-commerce stores, email marketing providers hooking into those. Like, if you have a MailChimp account and somebody signs up and has this tag, add them to my private podcast.
Yep.
A course, a membership site, anything like that. That whole world is so much bigger than, Spencer, you're maybe a little like privileged, right? That you have this huge audience, right? And everybody loves what you do in Niche Pursuits. But I think the fact is that that's really rare, right? And
Sure.
the ability for a lot of people to make a meaningful amount of money from their audience in a direct way like this, just on a podcast, I think is less than this kind of middle ground we're in, where there's a bunch of people with something else going on. If they want to offer a podcast as part of that, I think the opportunity is much bigger. So we're bullish, but much more on this private podcasting as an addition to something else that people are doing.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And you're kind of on the ground floor seeing, what the trends are and where things are moving. And I think it's really interesting. There's, like you said, there's probably hundreds of different ways that you could sort of implement a private podcast that's somehow restricted to a certain segment of your audience or customer base or whatever that is. That's interesting. I'll have to see if there's anything I can do here with Niche Pursuits. Any sort of private podcast I can be doing for that. But So Castos, you've got a lot of good ideas. You started to get good product market fit, a lot of adoption. You're growing the team. But with any business, and I know you're well aware that failures or struggles come along the way. What's one of the biggest struggles that you've had, or what's one of the biggest nightmare story that you've had, perhaps, with building Castos?
Yeah, I'm laughing to myself because I still remember reading your blog post about hiring developers. And I think it was something like, "Yo, bro, give me my code," right?
Yep,
Of like
that's funny. You remember that line? Yeah,
yeah. I mean, because I think for those of us that are non-technical founders of a software company, so I am not a developer, you are not either, I don't think, but we're kind of
nope.
sales and marketing folks. Hiring a developer, making product decisions, basically everything other than knowing the problem that the customers have, which is all that I bring to the table, is stuff I had to learn, right? And you're like building the parachute as the plane is going down, or whatever the analogy is. It's like, I decided I wanted to do this. We bought the plugin. I hired a developer, and like we're burning money right away. And like you make all of these decisions about how you work with a developer, how to hire a developer, much less. I got very lucky with a recommendation for our lead developer, Jonathan Bossinger, that has worked out amazingly. But I think that's where a lot of people get hung up is hiring the wrong developer for whatever reason. There's a bunch of them. But all of that like product and development side of the business is stuff that I've had to learn. And I think that the single biggest challenge and failure that we had is how I communicate what I think the product needs with a developer, because developers are different, right? Than like I don't want to say like I'm an idea person, because I actually do work, but like I have the idea or the vision, I'll say, of like what I want the product to be, and I want it to solve this thing. And you try to explain that to developer, and they hear something very different, right? It's like playing telephone. And so for us, the biggest difficulties we had that were really like communication and interpersonal was me saying, I want to build this thing. And it's usually like this half-baked idea. And then our developer going out and building it and coming back and say, hey, I built the thing. And you say, that is not the thing. Like, I wanted a round thing and you built a square thing. Like, and I have to be honest with myself, like, Craig, you did not tell them exactly what you wanted. So we have done a ton of work, mostly, and I think this is very fair, mostly for me to not like spout off about like, hey, let's go build this thing randomly on a Tuesday, but to have a real process around like, okay, we're in a 6-week development cycle. I can pull the CEO card and say, stop what you're doing over there, please go build this thing. But I really have to know that like, if I do that, they're going to give me some grief, and it's kind of against the rules, right? So like, we agree, we're going to do this thing. We have a call every 6 weeks about exactly what we're going to do. And we try very hard to stick to it. And beforehand, I try very hard to think about, okay, that 6-week time is coming. I have to have my stuff together to get everything I want in the product in the next 6 weeks, and do it in a way that's cohesive and complete, and that they can understand, so that they can go be successful. And it's super hard. It is super hard. I think it's so much easier. We hired a marketing person, Denise, and it was so much easier to say, I want to do content marketing. Go take the Hrefs course on content marketing and basically implement it. And that was so much easier than, telling Jonathan, I want to go build this thing. And he goes, builds what he thinks I said, and it's wrong. And it's like, that's totally my fault. It's not that he doesn't know what I'm saying. Yeah,
this could be me speaking everything that you said, right? Like I unfortunately have been through the same thing and still do it, right? Even with Link Whisper, I think I'm better now. But still, I will just sort of assume that they can read my mind, that, hey, do this little feature, right? It's simple in my head and then ends up being way more complex, or they interpret it differently or whatever. So I guess communication is sort of the the lesson there, right? Is being able to learn how different job functions communicate.
Yeah. And we're still learning, right? 3 years into 3.5 years into Jonathan and I working together, it's an evolution.
So I know you got involved with Tiny Seed. And so why don't you tell people what Tiny Seed is? And I guess I'm curious, why did you get a little bit of funding from Tiny Seed?
Yeah, so Tiny Seed is a remote startup accelerator that's really geared for companies that have historically been and kind of want to remain relatively bootstrapped. So I say that Castos is a mostly bootstrapped company. We received a small amount of funding, about $100,000, in return for giving up some equity in our company to Tiny Seed. So Tiny Seed is run by Rob Walling, who probably has been on the podcast.
Not yet, but I need to have him on. Yeah. So
Rob Walling and Einar Volset are kind of the general partners of Tiny Seed. So it's an accelerator that gives you a little bit of money in return for a little bit of equity in your company. Or I should go the other way, a little bit of equity in your company for a little bit of money. And it's geared primarily at, I'll say, earlier stage companies that are not on the VC track, not on the venture capital track. So, Dropbox and Airbnb and all these apps and companies that we use every day is not who they want to try to get in, but they're, companies like Castos or Link Whisper or Longtail Pro that have real potential to be 7 and 8 figure businesses, but are not going to primarily, their primary goal is not to go raise a Series A and a Series B and a Series C round. And so we were part of the first cohort of Tiny Seed, and so they work in cohorts, kind of like Y Combinator. So there's an annual, every year there's a new group. There was 9 or 10 companies in the first cohort, and it was really great. So the thing about Tiny Seed that I think is cool is it's not just the money. I think the money is I hate to say it because it sounds crazy, it's the least important of the 3 things that you get from it. But the money is one thing you get from it. The other thing is access and help from folks like Rob and Einar. And so Einar was in Y Combinator. He's kind of a big finance and acquisition guy in the startup world. And Rob's a multi-time founder and exited the Drip email marketing and marketing automation platform a couple of years ago. So he's definitely, they both have kind of been there and done that. So having access to them, and then they have a whole network of mentors. So folks like Jason Fried from Basecamp is a mentor, and the Collison brothers from Stripe. And so you're able to have access to folks like that, not whenever you want, but you can definitely get on their schedule when most other people can't. So I think those 3 things, like a little bit of funding for us to deploy for growth, access to Rob and Einar on a really consistent basis, and like the batch of your fellow founders for the companies, and then the network of Tiny Seed mentors. And so it was great. It's a year-long program. COVID kind of put a halt on part of our kind of in-person meetups that we were supposed to have. We were going to have like quarterly meetups. So we got about just under 3/4 of the way through that before that had the kibosh put on it. And it was great. It was really cool to be in a pretty intensive year-long program that was meant to help us grow our companies as much as we can, and then kind of put us on this trajectory to be successful afterwards. So,
yeah. So would you say you're happy you did it and it's really helped your company?
Yeah. What it did, and I think what it does for a lot of companies that have some degree of like traction, product market fit, is it just moves the future forward, right? It's like, it lets us spend this money before we have it, right? Because we definitely had product market fit. I was paying myself, and we were one full-time and one part-time developer. But we joined Tiny Seed, hired a full-time marketer, brought one of our developers on full-time. So we basically added a person and a half, and spent that money through the course of the first year, and operated like we were operating, a year and a half into the future.
Yeah.
So it's great. It's great. And for me, the reason we did it is kind of going back to like podcasting being popular is like, if we were an accounting app that like we could be in business forever and it's like this super static, slow moving market, I probably wouldn't have. But seeing the podcasting industry and seeing all this stuff changing and Spotify buying Anchor and Gimlet and all this stuff, I said, it's probably worth like giving up a small piece of the company for us to move ourselves forward so that we're, a bigger player in the market for whatever might happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, where do you see podcasting going in the future? I mean, you talked a little bit about private podcasting. That's an up and coming trend, and maybe even premium podcasting, but any other sort of future thoughts on podcasting? I mean, is it a rosy outlook? I mean, obviously I know you think so, but just any other thoughts on the future of podcasting? Where's it going to be in 4, 5, 10 years?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I think if I'm really honest, part of the reason that we joined Tiny Seed is I was really deep down a little skeptical about the longevity of podcasting, right? Kind of what I said is like, I guess I thought it was kind of a fad. Now seeing the amount of money and the amount of big companies getting into this in a couple of different like perspectives, I think it's as mainstream and will continue to be as blogging and as YouTube. So I think it's definitely kind of here to stay. And maybe it's because there's a couple of different use cases for it. The place I see podcasting is for businesses, kind of like a virtual resume, right? Like I think, Spencer, if you say, hey, if you want to tell someone about who you are, you say, I'm Spencer, I blog at nichepursuits.com and I have a podcast there. And those people are going to go listen to your podcast, we just hired a developer and like one of our questions was like, link to an article that you wrote recently and have you been on a podcast? And like for a developer, maybe that's a little, but it is like, we don't ask for resumes when we hire because we just want to see like what people have done. And like for a developer, that can be like a GitHub repository that's open source, could be a podcast they're on, it could be this project they have. And so I think for a lot of people, whether it's you wanting to go get a job or it's you as a company wanting to kind of show the world who you are, the content you put out there and the way that you talk about your industry and the people in it and your customers is who you are. And it's super transparent, And so nobody has to like get on a sales call with you because they've heard 400 episodes of your podcast. And so I think that from a really broad perspective, that's where it's going. And that's why a bunch of brands are getting into it, because they know that they can have 45 minutes in somebody's ear every week. And there is no other way that you can do that. And so it's, as a result, it's getting super competitive in the, I say like mass market entertainment kind of niches.
Right.
But I think for those of us in a niche, even as kind of broad as podcasting, that there's a huge opportunity to still kind of carve out your specific angle and attitude and approach to your topic and still stand out in a meaningful way.
Right. I agree. I mean, podcasting is super interesting, and I've been podcasting since 2012, believe it or not. And sometimes taking short breaks, like I'll go 6 months without recording it. That happened a couple of times, but I've been a little more consistent lately. And I still get people all the time that, how did they hear about you? Well, I heard the Niche Pursuits podcast. I love what you're doing over there. I get more feedback on that than from my blog, where I really put more time and effort into it. So it's really interesting. So I want to take us back to the beginning just a little bit again, because most people listening, usually, they're looking at starting something or take it from 0 to 1, right? They're trying to kind of get their first customer. So how did you get your first few customers to Castos?
Yeah. So I think that we got, again, like in hindsight, we got really lucky that we had this marketing channel built in already. So we had the plugin that had a bunch of free users, and we put up kind of a landing page in the plugin. So in someone's WordPress dashboard, when they upgraded to the latest version of the plugin, we put up this thing that said, hey, we have a hosting offer now. If you're self-hosting your files or you're with a competitor and you're doing all this iframe copying over, now you can just automatically upload your podcast file from WordPress. It goes to Castos. and it's totally seamless. And I mean, we had more than a couple of customers on the first day. So
Wow.
I think in that respect, we got really lucky. But I mean, we got lucky, but we had this built-in kind of channel already.
And how did Podcast Motor play into that? Did you were you able to bring over customers from Podcast Motor as well?
Yeah. So we brought over about half of the customers that are our service customers at Podcast Motor, and done a fair amount of kind of cross promotion of blogging and email list kind of swapping between the two. And even as recently as July, the two companies are now one, and the two brands are going to be becoming one. Maybe by the time this podcast goes out. So Podcast
Awesome.
Motor is kind of living inside the Castos app as Castos Productions. So it's all the same team that manages your show. But people are able to upload their files right from Castos and then just hit publish. And there's no back and forth in Dropbox and email and all this. It's just a workflow built right into the app in the same place you host your podcast, or that you'll host Niche Pursuits at some point, hopefully.
I honestly, I think I need to just move over. It sounds a lot easier because I still upload to Dropbox, and then I shoot you guys an email and say, hey, it's ready to be edited. And then I get an email back saying, hey, it's done. And then I download it, and then I upload it to Libsyn, and then I take that ugly URL and I paste it into WordPress, and I do all those things. So it sounds like this would be easier. So
yeah.
So
I'll tell you, man. So just to I think this is another thing that I've kind of gone back and forth on, but I think a lot of, especially technical people, want to shy away from professional services. But I think that doing so leaves a part of the solution that you're offering out for your customers, right? Because if I said, Spencer, I want you to switch from Libsyn to Castos, you would say, your podcast hosting, right? Podcast hosting is podcast hosting. And to a degree that's true, but I could say, yeah, but what if you only had to record this call in Zoom and then put that Zoom cloud hosted link in Castos, and we would do everything else? You're solving the whole spectrum of the problem, or a bigger one. So I think if people are able to swing a professional service with software, it's a really unique offering.
So I wasn't planning on taking the interview this way, but now I really want to know about my own podcast. So I am recording video. Will your team edit the video for me as well?
Yeah, we do video editing. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Video editing and upload to YouTube. Yeah.
So I know a lot of time, and I should know this too, but a lot of times, before the call, we chat, and sometimes that gets recorded, and sometimes at the end, we chat after the official podcast is ended, right? Are they going to edit all of that for me? I can literally just send it, and they'll kind of listen and know, hey, they're starting at minute 3.5 and they're ending at whatever.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I mean, we have customers that send us really explicit instructions about we start at minute 3.5 and we end at minute 48.5, and all that. But our editors are professional audio editors. They're full time. That's all they do is do podcast editing for us, and so they get a lot of that natural stuff. And times when you misspeak or you repeat yourself or you say 800,000 times, they take all that stuff out and make us all sound much smarter than we are naturally. So yeah, it's a pretty intuitive process. I hope it's a pretty intuitive process, because that's the promise that we try to deliver on.
Yeah, I think I'm sold. Let's do this. Honestly, I've probably been doing a little more work than I needed to. I mean, I don't edit my own podcast, but I still will kind of trim out the intro and the outro, the extras. And sounds like I probably don't even need to do that. So very cool. So for people listening in that might be interested in signing up for Castos, I know we talked about maybe having some sort of special offer for Niche Pursuits listeners. Why don't you kind of tell people where they could go and maybe what you're willing to offer there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we set up a page at castos.com/niche pursuits, and we're giving 50% off for the first 3 months of any of our kind of levels of service. And so there'll be a coupon code on that page. Just head on over to castos.com/niche pursuits. And we'd love to have everybody. We offer a 14-day free trial, get in, kick the tires and see if Castos is right for you. Spencer, like you, if you're moving from another provider, we have an automated import process that just grabs all of your content from Libsyn, wherever you're hosted, and brings it into the platform. So try to make that process as painless as possible.
Awesome. No, that sounds good. That's a great offer as well. Let's talk just a little bit about marketing. I mean, we talked a little bit how you got your first few customers, but what's been successful for you now, your ongoing marketing strategies? I know you mentioned you got a full-time marketer. You showed them, the Ahrefs, content marketing course, and they're running with that. Is that what's working, the content marketing for you?
Yeah, it is. I think part of like getting a little bit of funding is saying like, wow, we have like $100,000 in the bank. We need to spend it on ads, because that's the thing that like everybody says can change a business overnight. And I think it can, but we found it very difficult to make work. So we spent probably the first 6 months of Denise's time on the job as our marketer was trying to get paid ads working, either Facebook or Google. And it just didn't to the extent that we want. And so we've been big on the content marketing bandwagon for the last 6 months or so, and it's working really well. And I think content, I don't know, I'm sure you can agree, like content marketing means a lot of different things, right? Like
Right.
we have a YouTube channel, we have a podcast, we have several podcasts, we have a very active blog, but we also do a lot of things like guest posting and accepting other guest posts. We do some very light kind of link building. So I would say like content marketing and SEO, because we take like the SEO impact of our content really seriously. Because I think that's some place that like people say, oh, content marketing doesn't work, because they don't like content marketing is SEO and SEO is content marketing. And if you consider only one side of that, I think that's when a lot of people fail. So yeah, that's the long answer to content marketing is most of what we're doing these days.
Yeah. So you do some guest posting. Is the guest posting mostly for the links, or are you finding that you're actually getting on some good blogs where you're driving some actual referral traffic from those guest posts?
Yeah, the latter. Yeah, we try to be really intentional about where we try to guest post and saying like, if we guest posted here, what would we write about? Why is that important? Like, how does this fill kind of a content or exposure gap that we don't get naturally and organically? And when we're really intentional and smart about that, it works really well. And like being on this podcast is a good example, I think. Like I don't think we get a lot of fuel from your audience over here. So hopefully being on here and chatting about what we've done, and hopefully this is helpful to some folks, is cool, and people want to check out Castos as a result. And I think it's a playbook that's repeatable for a lot of folks and doesn't take a ton of time and doesn't take any money, right? It's just being on a podcast or writing some content.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have any indication or stats that you review to understand like how much SEO traffic, not how much SEO traffic you're getting, but how many conversions you're kind of getting from your blog or the content that lives on your blog?
Yeah, I mean, so we use Google Analytics and we have custom events. We have a couple of different custom events and use things like, especially on guest posts, we use UTM parameters to tell like where folks are coming from. And so try to tie some of those pieces together of like where someone is coming from to get to the homepage or a blog post. And then from there, we're able to see, because of custom events, like do people start trials? Do people opt into our email list? And things like this. So yeah, we track most of that through Google Analytics. And then from a usage perspective, we use Amplitude to see like when someone starts a trial, what do? Do they actually publish an episode? Do they create their first podcast? Do they visit the pricing page? So kind of at Google Analytics is leading up to the trial, and then Amplitude takes over from a product metrics perspective afterwards.
Very good. Any final or additional content marketing tips that are working well for you guys that you want to share? I know most of my listeners, right? They're definitely doing content. They're hopefully getting SEO traffic to their sites, and they love any sort of tidbits of information that you might be willing to share.
Yeah. I think the one that maybe is a little specific to software, and I'll say that it's like integration marketing. So we're integrating with Elementor, right? Like the really popular page builder. we're going to integrate with them from a product perspective, but we're also integrating and doing integration marketing with them from a marketing perspective. And so like, if you're a software company, that makes sense. If you're not a software company, think about like co-promoting something together with someone else, and think of, this kind of integration concept in the same way that like you have this offer, this unique thing that you're going to put in front of your audience, but what can you do alongside this person that you're co-promoting something with, to cross pollinate those audiences and get your message in front of people that you might not otherwise? Because I think, again, it's like content marketing without SEO, like content marketing or like an integration without marketing that integration is kind of a waste. And so we've seen some really good benefits with this. We integrated with MemberSpace, which is a popular membership platform. When we launched our private podcasting, and did quite a bit of marketing around that. And it was a pretty big success, I think, in large part because of doing those things all together.
So are you finding that those that you integrate with are willing to market that, kind of to their audience, say, hey, big announcement, Castos is now integrated with Elementor or whatever? Yeah.
I mean, I think you both have to bring the same amount of like weight or page views or whatever metric of exposure to the table, right? So like, I'm proud of our email list, but I know it's not nearly as big as the Niche Pursuits email list. So if we were going to do something together, you would say, okay, Craig, what are you going to bring? And I would say, well, we'll do a blog post and an email and a podcast episode, and we'll tweet about it. And our metrics of kind of exposure across all those are this. And you would say, that's great. So I will match that, or I'll give you half of that, or you can guest post on my site. And so I think that's all just this negotiation that Denise on our team has a lot of experience with from kind of previous roles, and she manages a lot of that. And I think it's different for every one of these kind of instances, but that's kind of how it works.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Those are great tips. I think people can kind of take that and apply that to their own business. So appreciate that. Just final question. I've been trying to read a little bit more lately, and I've got a backlog of books that I've been reading. And I'm just curious, are you reading any good books right now? Or do you have a book recommendation that you've read in the past that you'd like to share?
The one that I recommend a lot for business folks is called Traction by Gino Wickman.
It's a good one.
It's very trite and popular, but it really has changed a lot of how I run the business as like the leader and the founder. I think especially after you get over a couple of people, if you don't have some kind of system, you just pulling your hair out every day, which is what I was doing. And this has got me a little more sane.
Awesome. That's a good book, Traction. I agree. That is a good one for people to go check out. So, Craig, thank you so much for coming on the Niche Pursuits podcast. It's been great connecting again and, being able to hear a little bit more about your business. So if people want to kind of follow along, should they just go to castos.com? Is there any other place you'd like them to go?
Yeah, no, that's the best place. Castos.com, shoot us a message there. Happy to connect with anybody. I'm on Twitter very infrequently at the Craig Hewitt. If you want to send me a message there, DMs are open. But yeah, Spencer, this is really great. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a long time I've been listening. It's great to be on the podcast finally. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it.
Cool.